In 1992, on Everest, one man made the decision not to begin a rescue for a dying climber. The man was lying about 30 meters from the tents, and he was still waving his hand. The team went down. 19 years later, on the 22nd of May, 2011, that very same man, Ronald Naar, the first Dutchman to complete the 7 summits, suddenly collapsed himself at an altitude of around 8,000 meters, and he died on the mountain. Not on terrifying Everest, mind you, but on Cho Oyu, the peak the whole world calls the safest 8,000er on the planet. How does an easy mountain kill the strongest? And why does his death sound so much like an echo of the very decision he once made about another man? Ronald Edwin Naar was born on the 19th of April, 1955, in The Hague, in a country without a single real mountain. The highest point in the Netherlands barely reaches 300 meters. And here's the paradox. A boy from a flat land carved up by canals grows up obsessed with the vertical. He comes to the mountains as a teenager in the early 70s, and almost at once you can tell, this one doesn't back down. For a lowland country, he becomes a rare figure, a world-class mountaineer. Over his career, he will climb more than 600 peaks and take part in 4 dozen expeditions: the Alps, the Himalayas, the ice plateaus of Greenland and Antarctica. He writes books, gives lectures, becomes the face of Dutch adventure. And those who knew him closely note one trait: he is cold and calculating. In the mountains, he weighs risk the way an accountant weighs numbers. With a clear head, not with the heart. The ability to switch off emotion where others freeze up will save his life more than once. And one day, it will make him the center of an international scandal. To become a legend, you need walls that break a man. In the 70s, the young Dutchman goes straight for them, into the very heart of the Alps. His first big target is the north face of the Eiger, a mile and a half of vertical ice and crumbling rock. Its nickname is Grim, the Wall of Death. By then, it had already claimed dozens of lives. Naar is the first Dutchman to climb it. Then the Matterhorn and the Grandes Jorasses, the 2 other great north faces of the Alps, each with its own roll of the dead. Completing that trio, he becomes the first Dutchman to take all 3 great walls. Back home, they begin to speak of him as a national figure, and here his method shows itself. Naar doesn't throw himself at mountains headlong, and he doesn't chase a beautiful gesture. He works like a strategist. He takes the most prestigious targets and, methodically, one after another, crosses them off the list. That same sober calculation will one day, at another altitude, drive him to a decision that splits the mountaineering world in 2. For a man built like this, the Alps are only the beginning. Naar sets himself a goal that sounds almost like fantasy for his country: the 7 summits, the highest points of all 7 continents: Elbrus, Kilimanjaro, the Vinson Massif in Antarctica, Everest, and the rest. He climbs them one by one and closes the circle as the first Dutchman to do it. A separate line in his story is the first Dutch ascent of K2, the mountain they call the deadliest on the planet. Plus, first ascents of unnamed peaks in the Karakoram, in Bhutan, in Greenland, where no human foot had ever stepped before him. By this point, back home, his name has become almost a synonym for the word expedition. Say Naar, and a Dutchman pictures tents at 8,000 meters, frostbitten faces, a flag on a distant summit. A living icon. Only fame on that scale has an underside. The higher his name rises, the closer that one mountain draws, the mountain where calculation will turn against him. And in the spring of '92, it is already waiting. That mountain is Everest, and Naar is leading a Dutch expedition onto it. Camp after camp, the team pushes up to the South Col, a flat, wind-scoured platform at an altitude of around 8,000 meters. This is the upper edge of the death zone, the altitude at which the body stops recovering and slowly fades. People breathe thin air, barely a third of the oxygen they're used to, the brain working as if through fog. And here, right by the Dutchman's tents, lies a man, a badly frostbitten Indian climber who had fallen behind his own group and spent a long, deadly cold night on the col. His name was never learned. At dawn, one of the Dutchmen spots him some 20 or 30 meters from camp, and he sees something that takes his breath away. The lying man's hand rises weakly and falls, slowly, with the very last of his strength. But it rises. He is still alive, as if he's waving. 30 meters, A healthy man covers that in a few seconds. But at 8,000 meters, they stretch out into a whole chasm of decisions. And the one who must choose is the man who spent his whole life proud of his ability to resist pity. By eyewitness accounts, there were 7 people on the col that morning, 5 Dutchmen and 2 Sherpas. Enough to take the frostbitten man by the arms and legs and drag him those wretched 30 meters to a tent. At least to try. But Naar gives no such order. He takes the radio and calls the expedition doctor, sitting far below in base camp. The answer sounds like a verdict. The man has lain too long in the killing cold, the doctor explains. His body temperature has surely fallen past the critical mark, the point of no return. He cannot be revived, and dragging a body that chilled would only speed the end. Naar listens and decides. He does not begin the rescue. The logic is the same one that guided his whole career, the cold arithmetic of risk. The odds of saving a stranger are close to 0, and the price of the attempt is frostbite, maybe even the death of one of his own men. So, the Dutchmen strike camp and go down, leaving the waving man where they found him. For Naar, this is the only correct conclusion. For those who learn of it later, something else entirely. The Indian climber soon dies on the col where he was left. The mountain takes one more life, and the story takes its turn. The account of how a whole team of strong, healthy men walked past a man who was still alive travels far beyond the mountains. It becomes an international scandal, one of the bitterest arguments about the ethics of high-altitude climbing. The question is simple and terrible. Does a climber have the right to walk past a dying man, if helping threatens his own life? The sharpest voice of all belongs to the Briton Joe Simpson, a living legend of survival, a man who once crawled off a mountain with a broken leg and wrote a famous book about it. He knows the price of the death zone from the inside, and that is why his words strike so hard. Simpson calls what the Dutchman did one of the harshest examples of cold calculation he has ever heard of in the mountains. And he points out, there were plenty of people on the col, the resources were there, and in those same years rescues had succeeded in far worse conditions. Which means there was a chance after all. The argument drags on for years, but one thing is clear at once. Naar's name is now forever fused with that frozen morning on Everest. Another man in his place would have weathered the storm in silence. Naar does the opposite. In 2004, 12 years after that morning, he releases a book with a blunt title, Life and Death on Everest. In it, he steps openly toward his critics and lays out his version of events on the South Col. This is not a confession. It is a defense, built as coldly and logically as his routes. His main argument doesn't change. In the death zone, he says, an attempt to save a doomed man often means one thing, killing the ones who go to save him. But the book doesn't quench the argument. It pushes the two sides even further apart. For some readers, it's an honest reckoning with the ethics of altitude that most people won't speak of. For others, simply an attempt to justify the unjustifiable. Naar himself stands his ground to the end. He admits no mistake, asks no forgiveness. The mountains, he repeats again and again, do not forgive emotion, and he merely accepted their terms honestly. This faith in the number is what carries him onward, toward a mountain that will one day turn his own rule against him. Years pass, and the gray-haired veteran picks a new target, a mountain named Cho Oyu in Tibet. A strange choice for a man who has done the Eiger K2 and Everest. The 6th highest 8,000er on the planet, 8,188 meters, only 20 kilometers from Everest. The locals call it the Turquoise Goddess, for the soft tint of the snow on its slopes, and the goddess has a special reputation. Of all 14 8,000ers on Earth, Cho Oyu is considered the safest. Tens of times fewer people die here than on murderous Annapurna. That is why it's sold as a trekking peak, almost a stroll. People take it as their first 8,000er ever, a rehearsal before Everest. And here is the main trap. Behind the polite reputation, the easy mountain hides a whole arsenal of concealed killers. The same death zone as on Everest, the same avalanches that come without warning, the same bottomless crevasses under a thin bridge of snow, the same jet stream wind. Plus, Cho Oyu has one treacherous detail, a deceptively flat plateau near the summit, where it's easy to believe you've arrived and relaxed too soon. This is exactly the kind of mountain that lies in wait for those who trust their own experience too much. On the slopes of the Turquoise Goddess, Naar is precisely what he is, a gray-haired veteran with hundreds of summits behind him. He knows the cost of every step at altitude better than anyone on the team. Not some beginner the mountain could fool with a gentle name. He climbs soberly, sparingly, reading the slope like an open book. Naar goes high, up to about 8,000 meters, to where the summit already seems within reach. And here, almost at the goal, he does what he considered all his life the mark of a true master. He gives up the summit push. He decides to turn back. This is Naar to the core. For a man of his level, going down a step from the goal is not a defeat, but the highest expression of experience. Crowds die precisely because they can't find it in themselves to stop when the summit is just a little way off. But he finds it. The same cast of mind that once, on the South Col, told him not to risk the team now saves him from dying for a beautiful flag. He gives the team the signal, and together they begin the descent. And in that minute, everything looks right. The most dangerous stretch, the summit push, is already behind them. Ahead, it seems, lies only the long, straightforward way down, back to life. But mountains rarely reward good decisions the way we expect. The 22nd of May, 2011. The descent goes its way, step by step, down the familiar route, and suddenly something breaks. Not in the mountain, in Naar himself. He tells his companions that he feels unwell. A few words, no more. For a man who has climbed hundreds of peaks and never complained, that admission alone is an alarm. And here, at 8,000 meters, the body has no reserve to cope with a sudden failure. The system is already running on the last crumbs of oxygen, and any disturbance meets no resistance. Down in the valley, that kind of malaise would have passed unnoticed. Altitude does not forgive. A few moments go by. And Naar falls. This is not a slip on an icy slope, not an avalanche strike, not a plunge into a crevasse. None of the things he had prepared for all his life, none of the things he could calculate. The veteran's body simply gives out, quietly, ordinarily, in the middle of a routine descent. His team is right there, the very people who were coming down with him. But in the death zone, you can barely help another. Each man is hanging by the same thin thread. And so, at an altitude of around 8,000 meters, Ronald Naar dies, on the very mountain that was promised to be an easy stroll. Set these two stories side by side, and it makes your skin crawl. Between that frozen morning on Everest and this descent on Cho Oyu, there are 19 years. And still they seem to close in on each other, like two halves of a single circle. The man who once would not begin a rescue for a dying climber on a mountain dies himself on a mountain. The one who once could not help a stranger lying in the snow now stays lying himself at an altitude where the help of others decides nothing. The logic he defended himself with in 92 was that same merciless logic of the death zone turns against him. And a bitter detail completes the picture. On easy, safe Cho Oyu, he is killed not by the foolish error of a beginner, the kind he despised all his life. He is killed by a sudden failure of the body, the one thing no calculation can foresee. And there is no one else's fault in his death. No fatal choice stood beside him, like the one that once faced the team on the Col. What worked against him was not human cruelty, but that same arithmetic of altitude, the one he applied so confidently to other men's lives. And that is what makes the story of Ronald Naar not just an accident, but a loop that closes on itself. The truth he spoke all his life about others, altitude quietly spoke, at the end, about him. He was 56. At the moment of his death, Ronald Naar remained the most decorated mountaineer his country had ever produced, the first Dutchman to complete the 7 summits, the first to climb the north face of the Eiger and to reach murderous K2. A man who proved to a lowland country that the vertical yields even to those who grew up at sea level. But beside this shining list of victories stands another thing, forever. That dawn on the South Col in the spring of 92. Naar's story stayed double, uncomfortable, refusing to be reduced to a simple hero or villain. And the mountain, Cho Oyu after Naar, stayed exactly as it was before him, deceptively kind, polite, safe. It still lures people with the promise of an easy climb and takes all comers. The unready, the exhausted, the too sure of themselves. Behind that soft reputation hide around 50 of the dead. 50 names the mountain gathered quietly, one by one, through carelessness, through malaise, through that same deceptively flat plateau near the summit, Ronald Naar opens this mournful list. And he becomes, perhaps, its darkest lesson. The cold accounting of altitude makes no exception even for those who were certain they knew the mountain by heart. Ahead lie other names and other fates, taken onto its slopes by the Turquoise Goddess. On the 29th of April, 2019, a man falls into an ice crevasse, plunging 50 meters down. He wasn't chasing the summit, and he wasn't looking for glory. He was fixing the ropes so that others could climb them. His name was Phujung Bhote Sherpa, and he died securing an ascent led by a German with a tarnished reputation, a man whose name the press had earlier linked to a loud scandal over a disputed polar record. The one who paid with his life was the man almost nobody noticed, not the one the whole world was talking about. In every story about great ascents, there's a hero on the summit and a crowd that admires him. And almost never does the camera catch the ones who, long before the triumph, head out first across the ice and quietly climb back down before the clients even arrive. Their work ends where someone else's fame begins. Phujung was one of them, a high-altitude worker from the Makalu region in eastern Nepal. Not a star, not a record holder, but the man whose hands prepare the very possibility of reaching the top. The entire commercial climbing industry rests on people like him. Clients pay big money for the right to stand on a summit, but the road to it is laid, step by someone else. He goes first across untrodden snow, tests every footstep, fixes the ropes above the abyss, and heads back down to do the same thing all over again the next day, even higher. And the safer the path becomes. For the paying client, the more risk is shouldered by the one preparing that path. For Phujung, this daily danger turned into death. He died not at the shining summit of Cho Oyu, under the lenses and the awestruck gazes, but far lower down, on the approach in the middle of work that almost nobody notices. To understand why his death matters so much, we first have to understand who these people out front really are, and what price they pay for someone else's summit. Far to the east of Nepal, in the district of Sankuasaba, lies a harsh land of high ridges. This is where Phujung Bhote came from, born in the shadow of Mount Makalu. Flat ground is scarce here, and work is even scarcer. The mountains here are not a dream or an abstraction, but a literal part of life, both an obstacle and the only chance to earn a living. The Bhote clan are mountaineers by heredity. For them, the 8,000ers long ago stopped being a sporting arena and became a place of hard labor. A young man from a family like this grows up knowing that a single season on a big mountain can bring in as much as a whole year of work back home. One contract feeds an entire household, parents, wife, children. For that, people go to a place from which not everyone returns. The work of a high-altitude porter is simple only in words. In reality, it means heavy loads at extreme altitude, setting up camps, fixing ropes, laying a route across brittle ice. Everything that turns a wild slope into a passable path is done by these people, long before the guests who paid for the ascent climb up the finished trail, and here a gap opens up that is rarely spoken aloud. Western clients come to the Himalayas to fulfill a long-held dream, for the photo on the summit, for a line in their biography. The locals come for money that doesn't exist back in their home village. This difference hides behind equally beautiful photographs from the heights. But it is precisely what decides whose life on the route is worth more, and whose is worth almost nothing. Phujung was part of this world from the very start. In the spring of 2019, the road once again led him to a big mountain, to work ahead of someone else's dream. That spring, the team he ended up in was made up of 5 Sherpas. 5 local workers were supporting the ascent of 10 foreign clients, the usual ratio for commercial expeditions, where all the heavy lifting falls on the Nepalis. 5 go out in front, 10 climb up behind them along the prepared path. The organizing was handled by the Nepali agency Everest Parivar Treks, and at the head of the expedition stood a man whose name in the world of adventure was tied to anything but great deeds. The German, Martin Schwed. A few years before Cho Oyu, that name had already made headlines, and in the most unpleasant way. Schwed was known less for his climbs than for a loud public scandal, after which trust in his achievements was badly shaken. He had claimed an outstanding feat in the polar latitudes, and that claim turned into one of the most talked about cases of fakery in the world of expeditions. The people who trusted him to organize their ascent, and in effect their safety as well, could hardly have known his full history. To a client, a slick website and confident promises often seem more convincing than careful fact-checking. And the physically dangerous work on the route was done not by loud names, but by those very 5 Sherpas, whom almost no one could name. And so, a bitter picture took shape. Professionals going first across the ice were serving the ambitions of a man whose reputation had, by then, been publicly undermined by a scandal over an unproven record. To understand how vast this gap is, we have to go back a few years. January 2015. Thousands of kilometers from the Himalayas, Martin Swede announces a sensation. He claims that he skied solo to the South Pole in record time, 14 days, 18 hours, and 43 minutes. If it were true, he would have beaten the previous mark by almost 10 days. The real record on that route belonged to the Norwegian Christian Eide, and the margin Swede claimed looked not just outstanding, but impossible. And almost at once the claim began to fall apart. The first thing that failed the test was a photo. The selfie in which Swede supposedly stands by the marker at the South Pole turned out to be a fake, an image stitched together from different pieces. The proof that was meant to confirm his triumph became the evidence against him. Things only got worse from there. The logistics operators, the only ones who fly people into the depths of Antarctica, stated plainly that they had never taken Martin Swede on any route. The staff at the station right at the pole, where you cannot appear unnoticed, had never seen him there. No record, no expedition at all. He had never traveled the route he claimed. Cornered by the facts, Swede admitted that the photograph was faked, but even that didn't stop him. He kept insisting that he had, after all, been at the pole and had, after all, set the record, even though no confirmation existed. And every verifiable piece of data said the opposite. The story spread around the world and was covered in the press as a loud case of fabrication in the world of expeditions. It was this very man who, a few years later, led an expedition onto an 8,000er. But there, what was at stake was no longer a name. Between a lie on paper and danger on the ice lies an enormous difference. The polar affair was a game of reputations, an argument over who had proven what, a war of photographs and flight logs, a question of honesty, but not a question of life and death. No one died because a doctored selfie was exposed. On Cho Oyu, everything was different. Here the stakes were measured not in lines on a table of records, but in human lives. The same man whose name the press had linked to a loud story about an unproven record was now standing at the head of a group on an 8,000er. And while the skeptics argued about his past, the real work, the kind where a mistake costs your life, was being done by entirely different people. And this is the troubling meaning of the story. The consequences of that old scandal were almost painless for Swede himself. A loss of face, some mockery, a few articles in the press. But the price of real mountain risk fell not on him, but on the shoulders of those going first across the broken glacier. The Sherpas were simply doing their job, not choosing whose flag to walk under. They needed a contract and an income for the family. While the leader's name was being discussed as a curiosity, real disaster was building on the route between the camps. To understand what happened, we need to grasp what fixing the ropes actually involves. It's one of the most dangerous tasks on any big mountain. The idea is simple, to secure strong ropes along the route for the climbers coming up to hold on to. But to fix those ropes, someone has to go first, where the path is not yet marked, not yet tested, and protected by nothing at all. Leading that vanguard are the Sherpas. They are the first to step onto an unknown slope, the first to test the ice for strength, the first to find themselves above hidden voids. On Cho Oyu, the stretch between Camp 1 and Camp 2 is especially treacherous. Here the route crosses zones of broken glacier, where moving ice tears open into deep crevasses. From above, such a crevasse is often covered by a thin snow bridge, a deceptively even surface hiding a drop of tens of meters beneath it. The worker fixing the ropes moves across this trap and secures the lines so that those coming after him walk along a finished, marked-out path. He tests every meter with his own body, the meters that others will later cross without fear. And the altitude only sharpens the danger. At 7,000 meters, the air is thin, strength drains away fast, reactions go dull. Up here, any wrong step, any unreliable snow bridge is unforgiving. What in the valley would be an inconvenience becomes, up there, deadly. On the 29th of April, Phujung was doing exactly this work, ahead of the group, right on the sharpest edge. He was doing what he had done dozens of times, laying a safe path for others along a route that was not yet safe for anyone. The morning of that Monday gave no hint of tragedy. The team of Sherpas was running the ropes up from Camp 1 toward Camp 2 to an elevation of about 7,100 meters. The work went on as usual, familiar, grueling, known by heart. Phujung moved along with his comrades, preparing the way across the glacier meter by meter. And then came the thing no one had time to prevent. Beneath Phujung's feet, the snow bridge gave way, that same thin cover that hid the crevasse below. One moment, there was solid footing, and the next, it was gone. The ice split open, and the man plunged down, into a chasm no one could have known about in advance. The depth of the fall was about 50 meters, as high as a good 10-story building, only straight down, into a deep rift in the ice. From such a depth, at that altitude, surviving a fall like this was practically impossible. It all happened in a matter of seconds, between two ordinary steps of a working day. That was how the life of a man ended, in the middle of an ordinary working day. The bitter irony is that the ropes he was fixing were meant to protect the very clients coming up behind him from falling. The safety was being built for those who had paid, and the one who died was the one building it. His death became the first of the spring Himalayan season of 2019, the grim opening of a list that, by the end of the season, would prove long. But behind the phrase, "the first death of the season," stood neither a number nor a line of statistics. Behind it stood a specific man, a rope partner, the breadwinner of a family, who went off to work and never came back. The news was relayed down by Murari Sharma, the head of the Everest Parivar Treks agency. He confirmed that Phujung had fallen into a crevasse while fixing the ropes between the camps. For the official record, this was a short, dry report, a few words registering the fact of a death. The world in those days was looking the other way. The attention of the press was fixed on Everest, where that same season, a loud story of queues to the summit and a string of deaths was unfolding. Against those headlines, the death of a high-altitude worker on the neighboring mountain passed almost unnoticed. It was reported, it was entered into the statistics, and then everyone moved on. On the mountain itself, meanwhile, a hard and dangerous operation had begun, raising the body out of the crevasse. To recover a dead man from 50 meters down, at an altitude where every movement drains your strength, is a task on the very edge of risk in itself. But his comrades had no intention of leaving him in the ice. They wanted to bring Phujung back to his family so his relatives could say goodbye to him properly. The plan was to carry the body home, to the Makalu region, to the district of Sankuasaba, back to the place he had once left to go and earn a living in the hope of providing for his loved ones. For his family, this was neither a record nor a headline. It was the end of the breadwinner. That very income he had risked his life for turned into a loss no amount of money could ever measure. And the safest of the big mountains once again took its toll from the one who already pays for it more often than anyone. Phujung's fate is not an isolated case, but part of a large and grim pattern. On the highest mountains on Earth, it is the local high-altitude workers who bear the heaviest share of the risk. They enter the ice falls, cross the crevasses, and find themselves beneath avalanche-prone slopes before anyone else. For the labor that makes the summit reachable for those who paid for the ascent, they are paid immeasurably less than the Western guides, and the glory doesn't go to them. In Phujung's case, one more bitter layer was added to this. He was working for his family, serving the ambitions of an expedition led by a man with a ruined name. While the attention went to that loud name, the real price was paid by the man almost no one noticed, the invisible person whose work held up someone else's ascent. This story was barely written about on the front pages. It's remembered in the lists of the season's victims and in brief bulletins, but rarely as a living man. And yet every rope on the popular routes is hung by the hands of workers just like him. Their courage turns dangerous ice into a trail for paying guests. Phujung Bhote Sherpa remains in memory as a man who died preparing the way for others. Behind every beautiful summit stand those whose names we are duty-bound to remember. What does it take for a person to vanish without a trace on the planet's most forgiving summit? In the spring of 2002, Adam Cinnamon from Northern Ireland turned back before reaching the top of Cho Oyu. He did everything right, and he disappeared. He didn't fall in front of anyone's eyes. He didn't call out over the radio. He simply dissolved into the white slope. For more than 2 weeks, there was no trace, no answer. And then the mountain gave him back, at an altitude of around 6,800 meters, frozen into a crack in the ice. What happened between that right decision and this silence, nobody knows. May 2002. Adam is 34, and he has come from Northern Ireland. Not a star, not a record breaker. Just an ordinary guy for whom the mountains weren't a profession, but a passion. The kind you save your money for and take time off work to chase. One of 4 in a small team that the paperwork describes in a single short line. The Northern Ireland expedition to Cho Oyu. At base camp, they say this summit's name almost carelessly. People talk about it as the most accessible of the great 8,000ers, almost a stroll. Climbers come here to bag their first real giant, to test themselves before Everest. Trouble rarely waits here. People smile, take photos against the snow, chat about the weather and the menu, as if the mountain were a kindly host who leads its guest by the hand all the way to the top and back. Adam doesn't stand out in any way. He goes on acclimatization climbs, sleeps in his tent, listens to the whistle of the wind across the slope. Ahead of him lies an ordinary schedule, an ordinary summit push, an ordinary return home with photographs and one more line on the list. That's how it looks in those first few days. And then something happens that doesn't fit the word stroll. Adam heads up the road, and he doesn't come back. He doesn't fall in front of his companions, doesn't cry out for help, doesn't come to rest in some open spot where they'd find him within the hour. He simply stops being there. He walks off into the white silence, as though the mountain had quietly shut the door behind him. Where does a man go on a slope that obediently lets through hundreds like him every single season? Why is one person pulled out of that patient line, with not a single word of explanation? The answer won't come soon, and it will turn out to be heavier than any guess. Let's rewind the tape a few days, to a moment that in the mountains is considered the wisest of all. High on the route, somewhere on the way to the summit, Adam makes the one choice that saves more lives than any piece of equipment. He decides not to go any further, not to push on for the very top, to turn back. Anyone who knows the mountains even a little understands. This is the right call. The summit is only half the journey, and it's the second half that's more dangerous, the descent, when your strength is already spent and your focus has dulled. Experienced climbers repeat it like a commandment. The mountain will always be there, but a second version of you won't. To turn around a step from your goal is not weakness. It's clear thinking. It's the thing that lets you get home. Adam turns around. He gives up the summit he'd been climbing toward, the one he'd spent money on, time on, months of preparation on. He lets the dream go in order to survive. By any measure of common sense, it's a flawless move. He chose to come down alive to his own people, rather than leave his name among the conquerors. And here the story takes its most bitter turn. The one who won't come back is precisely this cautious, sensible man who made the right decision. Not the one who gambled and pushed for the top, already exhausted, but the one who turned back in time. After that comes a blank, unfilled pause that no one has ever managed to reconstruct, minute by minute. No one saw him last. No one remembers which way he was headed. There's no entry in a diary, no final radio call, not even an approximate hour when it all happened. One bare fact remains. He set off toward safety and stepped into an emptiness he never came out of. His companions are waiting for him in camp, 3 of the 4 who came from home with him, who shared his tent, his tea, and his talk about home. They watch the slope, judge the time, count off the hours a person needs to make it down, and at some point they realize he's late. At first, it isn't fear yet. The familiar mountain thought, well, he's running behind. Maybe he got tired and sat down to rest. Maybe he's moving slowly through deep snow. Maybe he miscalculated and he'll appear any moment now, over the nearest rise, wave a hand, and everyone will breathe out. At this altitude, time stretches strangely, and being an hour or 2 late doesn't mean anything by itself. But the hours pass. The light over the slope fades, the temperature drops, the wind picks up, the kind that turns an open slope into an icy anvil. Night comes. At this altitude, darkness isn't just the absence of the sun. It's a wall you can't step beyond without risking your life. In the dark and the cold, no one goes out to search. That would mean losing more people. All that's left is to wait and stare into the blackness, where the light of his headlamp must appear. The headlamp doesn't appear. Morning comes without Adam. And now the alarm stops being a guess and becomes a heavy, cold fact. The cautious man who chose to descend didn't reach the tents in a whole night. The kind, easy mountain suddenly stopped answering. No man, no explanation. Where he is, and whether he's alive, that's the only thing that matters at daybreak. One day without word turns into 2, then 3, then the count runs into weeks. And with every passing day, the hope that still flickered on that first morning melts away like snow in the sun. Not a day passes, not 2. More than 2 weeks go by, and Adam's cinnamon seems erased from the world. No sound, no clue, no hint of where he has gone. You only grasp the full weight of it when you picture where the search is happening. This is not a forest where you can comb it in squares and turn loose the dogs. This is high altitude, where the climb itself drains the last of your strength, where every hour at that height slowly poisons the body. Searching here for long is physically impossible. The people who go up to look are themselves balanced on the edge, and any extra effort could cost them their lives. And the glacier itself is built to hide. From a distance it looks like a smooth white field, even and dependable. In reality, beneath that whiteness lies a labyrinth. The mass of ice is scored with crevasses, deep drops that plunge tens of meters down. Fresh snow drifts thin bridges over them, and the slope looks whole and safe again. But an emptiness is hidden underfoot. To find one man in that labyrinth is almost like searching for a needle hidden inside a block of glass. The days build into weeks. His companions, the rescuers, everyone with any part in it, come to a heavy conclusion. Adam won't come out on his own. And one question remains, whether the mountain will give back even his body. It absorbed the living man completely, and to every call, it answers only with a blank whiteness. It is still possible to work out how a field that looks so even swallows a person whole. The mechanics are simple, and that makes them all the more cruel. The glacier moves, cracks, breathes, it never stands still. And where the snow held only yesterday, today a drop has already opened beneath a thin crust. What you get is a trap of perfect camouflage, a smooth white surface above, an abyss below. The walker can't see the boundary. One wrong step off the beaten path, and the snow bridge gives way under the weight of a body. The most treacherous part is that this deadly mechanism hides behind the reputation of an easy mountain. Where danger is expected, people go focused, roped in, alert to every step. But where a stroll is promised, people arrive relaxed. And it's that ease that kills quietly. It dulls your caution in exactly the place where the slope forgives the least. Beneath the snow, the kind mountain runs the same merciless arithmetic as its fearsome neighbors. The only difference is that here, nobody expects it. There's a second side too, one that's even harder. To go into a crevasse is to go in silence. There's no cry that reaches those below. No fall in plain sight for companions to witness. The slope simply opens and closes again, and fresh snow settles over it, erasing the last trace. A person slips down into the cold darkness, and not even a dent is left above him. That's why the search was doomed. The mountain left no clues. It took Adam as quietly as it takes so many others, and sealed away everything it took, in a depth that no gaze and no hand can reach. The 20th of May, 2002. After more than half a month of blind waiting, the mountain finally loosens its grip. Adam Cinnamon's body is found, not below, where he was descending, but high on the slope, at an altitude of around 6,800 meters, right where, you'd think, he should long since have passed, where the beaten track to camp was waiting. All that time, he had been very close, but unseen. They find him in a crack in the ice, in the very drop that had lain hidden beneath the snow, waiting for a step to the side. Over the weeks of waiting, the slope seemed to have made him part of itself, set into the wall of the fissure, inseparable from the mountain that took him in. There's something in that image that catches the breath. A glacier is not just rock and snow. What it takes stays with it for decades, without aging, without ever coming back into the light. Adam became one of those, a silent testament to what happened on a safe summit. But behind that image, it's important not to lose the main thing, the man. This is not a discovery, not an exhibit, not a line in a list of the dead. Behind the ice was a living Adam, 34 years old, a guy from Northern Ireland who had saved for years toward this dream and, at the decisive moment, chose the turnaround and the road home. The mountain gave his body back to his companions, but it gave back not a word about what had happened. It kept the secret for itself. That silent exchange is the most bitter thing in his story. Many years have passed, and no clarity has come. To this day, no one knows exactly how or when Adam fell into the crevasse, whether he was alone in that moment, what made him step off the trail, how much time passed between his last step and the silence. All of these questions have gone unanswered, and most likely always will. The mountain keeps no records, and life around his death went on in its own strange, sometimes unpredictable ways. That same season, other teams were working on Cho Oyu. With one of them, according to some accounts, this story is joined by a thin thread. In an expedition that shared these slopes, there was a young Briton named David Sharp. According to some accounts, because of what happened in that team, a place opened up in the group's plans for the following year, on Everest in 2003, and it was Sharp who took it. That same David Sharp who, years later, would himself die on Everest and become the central figure of one of the most debated mountain tragedies. So, a death on an easy mountain may have turned out to be a fork in someone else's fate. That is the whole lesson of Cho Oyu. People speak of it as the gentlest of the great summits, the one that doesn't bite, and yet it's here that you can vanish in broad daylight, within reach of your companions, and lie for half a month literally beneath the feet of those who walked past. It arranges death so that neither witness nor cause is left behind, and then it goes back to pretending it's harmless. Adam Cinnamond just wanted to come home. He made the right decision and turned back. The mountain took what was its own and never said why. Its greatest danger isn't in the height or the cold. It's in this ability to stay silent. October 1959. 12 women from 5 countries set out to climb, an 8,000er as their own team. No men, no chaperones, no one making allowances. Nothing like it had ever been done before. They were led by Claude Kogan, a swimsuit designer for Dior and one of the strongest mountaineers in the world. Only a few dozen meters stood between them and the summit, and then the mountain they called the safest of them all wiped out a historic attempt in a single instant. How did it happen? And why was Claudine's last note about beauty? Paris, 1919. Into the Tragedies family, a girl is born, whom the whole climbing world will one day know as Claude Kogan. She didn't begin on the rocks. She began at a sewing machine, first a seamstress, then a designer of women's swimwear, and one day the house of Christian Dior turns up among her clients. High fashion and sheer rock faces. You could hardly imagine two worlds further apart, and yet in her life, the two came together. It was a man who brought her to the mountains. In Nice, during the years of the occupation, she meets a climber named Georges Kogan, and he opens up the vertical world to her. Claude stands just over 1.5 meters, slight to look at, which makes her strength all the more astonishing. On a rock face, she holds herself with an icy calm that leaves even seasoned men speechless. In 1946, Kogan climbs the north face of the Aiguille du Drou, one of the most fearsome walls in the French Alps. Europe isn't enough for her. In the early 50s, she heads off to the Andes, Alpamayo, Quitaraju, the first ever ascent of Salcante. The small woman who once sewed swimsuits for Parisian fashionistas is now among the strongest women climbers of her era. 1953. High in the Himalayas, Kogan stands on the summit of Noon, more than 7,000 meters. For her, this is not just one more mountain. It's a record. No woman before her had ever climbed higher. 2 years later, the first ascent of Yangra in the Ganesh Massif. Her routes climb higher and higher, more and more serious, and they all lead in one direction, toward the 8,000ers. In 1954, Kogan takes her first shot at Cho Oyu. Roped alongside her is the Swiss climber Raymond Lambert, a seasoned mountaineer. They climb very high, with about 450 meters left to the summit. In good weather, that's just a few hours of walking, but the weather is bad. The sky turns foul, the wind stiffens, and Lambert decides to turn back. Kogan doesn't want to give in. By some accounts, she is choking with fury, begging not to surrender so close to the goal. But in the mountains, stubbornness rarely wins out against a storm. The rope team turns around and heads down. The mountain lets Kogan go alive, but it takes from her what was almost within her grasp. Those last 450 meters become her unsettled account. And out of that grievance, out of that sense of a job left unfinished, her boldest plan will grow. 5 years later, the idea finally comes to a head. In 1959, Kogan puts forward a proposal that, for its time, sounds almost like a provocation to assemble an international women's expedition and bring a team of women, and only women, to a great summit. The project is named the Expedition Féminine au Nepal, the Women's Expedition to Nepal. At the center of it all is Kogan herself, the leader, the organizer, and the driving engine of the whole venture. To grasp just how bold this is, remember the times. In the 50s, mountaineering is almost entirely a man's world. A woman is cast as a partner, a helper, at best an exception to the rule. Kogan wants to overturn that order, and she goes all the way. No male journalists are allowed on the mountain. The British reporter Stephen Harper is kept well away from base camp, so that not even an outside gaze could diminish the triumph to come. The women state their reason plainly. There must be no man nearby, one of them explains, or people will start to belittle their achievement. For many on the team, this is no longer just sport. It's a statement. A woman reaches on her own, without another's hand on the rope, the place she used to be led to. The whole mountaineering world watches what Kogan has set out to do, with a mix of curiosity and doubt. The core of the expedition is 9 European climbers from different countries, each with her own life and her own temper. Kogan's number 2 and deputy is the Belgian Claudine van der Straten. She's 26, from an aristocratic family, a former lady of the court, a superb skier, and a strong climber. The age gap between the two is nearly 14 years, but on a rock face that counts for nothing. Claude and Claudine had met far from the Himalayas, in Peru, on the mountain Kayesh, where they climbed on the same rope, and ever since they trust one another on the line so completely that Kogan takes the Belgian as her right hand for the most dangerous undertaking of her life. It is Claudine who will go with her on the last, decisive push toward the top. Alongside them is the Swiss climber Lulu Boulaz, one of the best-known mountaineers in Europe. From Britain come Dorothea Gravina, Margaret Darval, and Eileen Healy, a bacteriologist by trade who also films the expedition on movie stock. The women are all very different, in age, in profession, in mother tongue. One is driven to the mountains by the thrill, another by a longing to break out of a life that has grown too smooth and too familiar. Joining the European contingent are Nepali women climbers, among them relatives of Tenzing Norgay, the very man who first stood atop Everest. Traveling with the expedition too are about 10 Sherpas, among them Ang Norbu, Wangdi, and Chewang. They break trail ahead of the rope teams and set the higher camps, and it is they who will be the first to reach the places where it's high and dangerous. Different countries, different fates, and different tongues, but a single goal shared by all. In the autumn of 1959, the team sets off for the mountain. The road begins long before the first step on the ice. The expedition stretches out in a long file on the trek in, through valleys and over passes, and the weather is against them from the very start. The monsoon, the summer season of rains, is in no hurry to leave this year. Warm downpours soak the ground, the trail turns to mud, the air is heavy and damp. What falls as rain down below falls as snow up above. On the slopes of Cho Oyu, it settles layer upon layer, and the snowfalls never let up. The women stubbornly get on with their work, pitching camps along the route, lifting loads higher, pushing the expedition upward step by step. Claudine van der Straten marks the kit bags with red nail polish, the only cosmetic left to her in this austere company. Small frictions run between Claude and Claudine. Over trifles that, in the tightness of camp, swell into a quarrel. But above the third camp, everything personal falls away. All that remains up there is the mountain, the thin air, and the snow that grows heavier and more dangerous with every passing day. The 29th of September, 1959, the decisive push. 2 of them set out upward from the third camp, Claude Kogan and Claudine van der Straten. With them is the Sherpa Ang Norbu, reliable and experienced. The plan is clear. Climb higher, set the 4th and highest camp, and from there, go for the summit. There isn't much left to the goal. Kogan remembers her high point from 1954, that mark 450 meters from the summit, where a storm turned her back 5 years ago. Now she means to go further, only a few dozen meters of new ground upward, and on them will end everything she has put off for 5 years. For her, this is not just altitude. It's a return to the place where she once had to turn around. The three of them settle into the high camp, clinging to the slope far above the others. It's cold up here, thin-aired and silent, and tomorrow they'll set out from it toward the summit. Down below, in the third camp, their support is waiting. No one yet senses any trouble. The mountain is calm, almost welcoming, and it is precisely that deceptive gentleness that is the most dangerous thing about it. The next day, a short note comes down from the fourth camp in Claude van der Straten's hand. No alarm, no fear, only a quiet wonder. "Come and see," she calls out. "It's so beautiful here." These few words will turn out to be her last message. In them is all the joy of someone who has almost reached her dream and stands admiring the world from a tremendous height. And then the weather changes. It grows warmer. To an outsider's ear, that sounds like good news. After the long snowfalls, warmth at last. But in the mountains, warmth over fresh snow is one of the most ominous signals of all. Snow soaked with meltwater grows heavy and loses its grip. Vast slabs on the steep slopes stop holding, waiting only for a nudge to break loose. And that is exactly what happens. Down the body of Cho Oyu, avalanches begin to slide, one after another. The quiet, easy mountain that so many thought the kindest of the giants turns, within a few hours, into a trap. The roar of rushing snow rolls down the slopes, and the high camp, where the three of them have taken shelter, stands directly in its path, a tiny tent on a huge, primed slope. The people inside don't yet know that the mountain has already decided everything for them. An enormous slab of snow breaks loose higher up the slope and comes crashing down on the high camp. Claude Kogan, Claudine van der Straten, and the Sherpa Norbu are caught in its path, all three of them at once. Between the calm of morning and catastrophe pass only seconds, far too few to get out, to retreat, or to call for help. The historic attempt is cut short. The women's expedition that was meant to change everything people believed women climbers could do loses in one stroke its leader and her closest partner. What Kogan had nurtured for 5 years and carried through valleys, snowfalls, and sleepless nights is ended by a single shift of the slope. A plan born of stubbornness and faith runs out just a few dozen meters short of coming true. Lower down, in the third camp, their companions still can't grasp the whole picture. They hear the roar, they see the entire slope come into motion, but they can't bring themselves to believe the worst. Up above, where the tent stood only moments ago, there is now nothing, and not a sound comes from there. And the ones left behind face a question with no easy answer, whether to climb up there, into that same dangerous zone, to search for their companions. Two of them decide, Wangdi and Chiwang. Both Sherpas set out upward from the third camp, knowing full well how dangerous the slope has become. They climb straight into the very place the avalanche has just come down, on the ghost of a hope of finding their companions alive. A desperate kind of courage, to walk toward a mountain that has already shown what it can do. They aren't allowed to climb high. Right in the rescuers' path, the slope breaks loose again. A second avalanche catches them as suddenly as the first caught the camp. By some miracle, Wangdi survives, digs his way to the surface, and calls out for his partner. But Chiwang is no longer there beside him. To the three who died, a fourth is now added, a man who came to save the others. To keep searching is pointless and deadly. The slope is living its own menacing life, and every step upward could cost yet another life. The deaths of the Sherpas Norbu and Chewang will long stay in the shadow of this expedition's loud women's legend. Their names will be remembered less often than they deserve, and yet their fate was one and the same as everyone else's, and they paid the very same price for someone else's dream that they carried on equal terms with all the rest. The dead are never found. The mountain keeps them for itself. A week passes, and the missing are officially declared dead. All that time, the surviving climbers keep the terrible news from the press. Darval, Gravina, and Healy want the families, not the newspapers, to be the first to know. For almost a week, the reporter Stephen Harper is kept in the dark, sparing those close to the dead, and at the same time, protecting the venture itself. Dorothea Gravina takes command. There can be no continuing the climb under such conditions. The team packs up and quietly makes its way down, leaving behind the slope that cost the expedition 4 lives. Claude Kogan went at the height of her fame. At 40, at the head of the world's first all-women team. Her vision was ahead of its age. Cho Oyu did not become the first summit reached by women that time. That would be achieved by others, much later. But the idea outlived the tragedy, and years afterward the path was taken up by those who had read about this expedition while they were still girls. The Sherpas who died on equal footing with the climbers would be remembered too late, and Claudine's note remained, about the beauty she saw a moment before the end. 82 4,000ers of the Alps in a single winter. 102 days in a row of frost and avalanches. Before him, nobody had ever dared to try it. The Slovenian Miha Valic was called the Iron Man. It seemed the mountains simply weren't capable of breaking him. And yet, at 29, he died on an 8,000er that people consider the easiest and safest of them all. The 5th of October, 2008, Cho Oyu on the descent from the summit. No storm, no avalanche, no sheer wall, just an ordinary fall. This is the story of how a walk-in-the-park mountain takes the strongest of all. He was born on the 4th of November, 1978, in Ljubljana. Slovenia is a small country, but its school of mountaineering is one of the finest in the world. Valic was drawn upward from childhood, and he turned that pull into a profession. He became a mountain guide, the kind of man who is responsible for other people's lives up high. Though guiding was only part of what he did, what really defined him was the style of his climbs. He was a rare all-rounder. Some climbers are strong on rock, others on ice, others endure altitude. Valic could do it all at once. On sheer walls, he climbed routes of the highest grade, the kind only a handful of climbers on the planet can manage. In 2003, he came to California's Yosemite Valley and, together with his partner Mejaj Jaran, free-climbed the freerider route on the granite monolith of El Capitan, 1,200 meters of smooth stone, where every meter is won at the very limit of your fingers and your nerve. Free climbing is when your gear only protects you from a fall, and you move upward on the strength of your arms, your legs, and pure friction, nothing else. On a wall like that, it's the ultimate test of skill. Behind him, he already had around 10 serious expeditions. Patagonia with its insane winds, the Karakoram, the Himalaya. He had been everywhere that mountaineering tests a person's limits. Ticking off 8,000ers held no interest for him. He didn't collect fashionable summits. What mattered to him was the difficulty of the line and the purity of the style. In his not quite 30 years, Valic was one of the strongest climbers in Slovenia, which meant one of the strongest in the world. Men like that are described in a single phrase: the Iron Man. Endurance, calm, the ability not to panic where others lose their heads. He seemed built for the mountains. Because of this reputation for being unbreakable, his story is especially hard to tell. Ahead of him lay a feat no one had ever accomplished, and an ending no one could have imagined. In the winter of 2006 to 2007, he set his sights on something that seemed impossible even to seasoned mountaineers. In the Alps, there are 82 4,000ers, summits above 4,000 meters from the official list of the International Mountaineering Union. To take them all in a single summer season is already a rare achievement. Valic decided to take them in winter, in one winter, back to back, without long pauses. He set off on the 27th of December, in the darkest and coldest days of the year. He finished on the 7th of April. Between those two dates lay 102 days of unbroken work in the frost, in the wind, under an avalanche threat that in winter multiplies many times over: snow, ice, short daylight, frost-bitten fingers. For more than 3 months, this was simply his everyday life. Every morning he climbed again, whether the sun was shining or the snow was blowing so hard you couldn't see your own hands. The pace was monstrous. The first 74 summits he took in 82 days. The remaining 8 peaks cost him another 20. In some places he went alone, in others with rotating partners. They joined him for individual sections and then went back down to recover. In all, 15 friends helped him, but he carried the whole chain alone. His partners took turns changing over and resting, while he never stopped for a single day. It was this relentlessness that made the task almost inhuman to grasp the scale of it. Climbing all these summits in a row is a rare undertaking even in summer, in warm weather, and on dry rock. And Valic climbed them in winter, the first in the history of mountaineering to do so. No one before him had even tried, and few believed such a thing was even within human reach. To take a couple of winter 4,000ers and go home to warm up is one thing. To live an entire winter up high, where cold, wind, and avalanches become a daily routine, is something else entirely. The record turned him from a strong professional into a living legend. Valic's name rang out across Europe. Mountaineering magazines wrote about his marathon, and what they valued wasn't a line in a table of achievements, but the fact itself. Human endurance, it turned out, has almost no ceiling, and here lies an invisible danger. The man who proved his mastery to the mountains time after time begins to believe he has earned immunity from them. It seems Valic himself had grown convinced that nothing could ever catch him off guard again. The Alpine Marathon was only one facet of him. Step away from the snow and ice, and before you stands a master of an entirely different kind, the one who takes on enormous vertical walls on the other side of the world. And there he played for high stakes, choosing only the pure style. In 2004, he set off with his partners for Pakistan to the rock towers of Trango. The goal was the nameless tower and the eternal flame route. The team climbed it in alpine style, fast, with no advanced preparation, no kilometers of prefixed ropes, everything carried on their own backs. They climbed it as the first to do so, and that took not only strength, but complete composure on sheer granite high above the glacier. In a team like that, the slightest mistake leaves no room for a second attempt. 2 years later, he was drawn to the far side of the world again, to Patagonia, to the fearsome Fitzroy. Here, the wind knocks you off your feet, and the weather changes in minutes. Valic repeated one of the hardest routes, once again in pure alpine style. And a year after that, in 2007, he opened a new path up the southwest wall of the peak of Patibhara in Nepal, a line above 7,000 meters that no one before him had climbed. Each new expedition added a brushstroke to his portrait. Pakistan gave him vertical granite above a glacier, Patagonia, a battle with the wind, Nepal, a first ascent up an untouched wall. Where most climbers merely survive, clinging to every meter, Valic felt at home. The mountains had become his native element, and with every season the word spread. For this Slovenian, no doors remained closed, and here comes the bitter irony of his fate. To the man who had taken the ice walls of Pakistan and stormed the winter Alps, an ordinary high-altitude 8,000er, with a reputation for being easy felt, almost like a rest, a stroll after the real trials. It was in that frame of mind that he looked toward Tibet. In the autumn of 2008, the idea took concrete shape. Valic put together an expedition to Cho Oyu, and as always, he was no ordinary member here. He was the engine of the whole undertaking, the one who caught fire first and pulled the others along behind him. An organizer and a leader by nature. For a man with 82 winter 4,000ers behind him, this mountain did not look like a serious challenge. And on paper, there was reason for that. The standard route really is considered technically undemanding, almost gentle by the standards of 8,000ers. There are no sheer ice walls, no puzzle-like sections where everything is decided in fractions of a second. Many come here as if on a long, high-altitude trek, taking the summit as a rehearsal before Everest. But in that very ease lies the trap. A mountain called accessible lulls your vigilance. A person relaxes, loses concentration, stops seeing any threat in it. And yet the altitude hasn't gone anywhere. The thin air, where every step is heavier than the last, is the same as ever. The piercing wind is the same as ever. And the treacherously even snowfields with hollows hiding beneath them are still there too. An 8,000er remains an 8,000er, no matter how easy people call it. In his head, Valic understood all of this, of course. But he felt it differently. After everything he had been through, this mountain hardly seemed dangerous to him. He climbed upward calmly, confidently, exactly the way he always had. Without fuss, without fear, with that inner ease that great experience gives. The expedition rose camp by camp, ever closer to the summit. And everything unfolded just as it should for a master of his caliber, without a single hitch. Sunday, the 5th of October, 2008. Valic stands on the summit of Cho Oyu. The goal is reached, the mountain is taken. For the strongest of Slovenian climbers, the result is only to be expected. One more peak on the list, one more proof that nothing is impossible for him. But the summit is only half the journey. Experienced climbers know a brutal truth. Most tragedies in the mountains happen not on the way up, but on the way down. Going up, a person is focused, driven toward the goal, every nerve drawn tight. Coming down, he trudges already tired, hollowed out, his attention dulled. After an 8,000er, there is almost no strength left, not enough oxygen, the legs move on autopilot. The task is done, the mind switches over to rest. And this is exactly when the mountain becomes most dangerous. The most treacherous stretch begins right where, in his mind, the climber is already sitting in base camp with a mug of tea. And here, on the descent, after a summit successfully taken, Miha Valic falls. The fall proves fatal. He was 29 years old. What exactly happened is not known for certain. The sources don't say at what altitude it occurred, what condition he was in, or whether anyone was beside him in that second. The mountain keeps this secret, as it keeps so many others. Only the essential thing is known, and in that essential thing lies all the bitterness. A man they called Unbreakable died on an 8,000er with a reputation as the safest of all. It wasn't the elements that undid him, just an ordinary fall on the descent, the kind that happens even to beginners on their very first route. The ending turned out to be the most ordinary one imaginable, and in that lies the whole bitter truth of the story. The granite towers of Pakistan let him go. The battering winds of Patagonia couldn't reach him. 3 months of alpine frost he carried on his shoulders without bending, and what gave way beneath him was the very mountain that many take for a light warm-up. Experience, strength, nerves of steel. In the decisive second, none of it counted for anything. One wrong step was enough to cut short a fate that would have been enough for 10 lives. News of the young guide's death struck all of little Slovenia. This country takes pride in its mountaineering school, perhaps more than in anything else, and the loss of such a talent echoed as pain in thousands of hearts. For the community, it was not just the death of an athlete. A man was gone in whom people had seen the future of Slovenian mountaineering. In a country where every great name can be counted on the fingers of one hand, a loss like that is felt twice as deeply. And it is precisely the mismatch between the scale of the man and the circumstances of his passing that wounds most of all. Fate, it seemed, was obliged to find him an ending worthy of his whole life, grand, desperate, at the very edge. Instead, it dealt with him in the most everyday way, as if he had been some chance tourist and not one of the strongest climbers on the planet. Climbers still retell Valic's story to one another, to this day, as a warning paid for with the highest price. On a sheer wall, everyone knows in advance that there is no room for error, and so they stay focused. But a gentle slope doesn't frighten you, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous. Disaster hides not where it feels frightening, but where it feels calm. The more confident a person feels in the mountains, the shorter the path to the fatal mistake. The memory of him did not fade. There remained a book called The Wall, which he worked on together with his companions from the mountains. There remained his winter record, 102 days, 82 4,000ers, which over all these years few have dared to repeat. There remained a name that in the world of the mountains is spoken with respect, and the main lesson of his fate is cold and simple. In the great mountains there are no safe summits. There are only the ones that have managed to pass themselves off as safe, and it is exactly those that cost the most, because they let you come too close before they catch you off guard. 2 of them set out for the summit and never came back, in those very days when the team was celebrating its success. On the 5th of May, 2000, the Finnish climber Noora Toivonen and Pavel Bonadysenko from Irkutsk left the last camp and headed up toward the top of Cho Oyu, and they vanished. No fall, no avalanche, only a storm wind, a flat white plateau under an open sky, and one wrong turn. They have never been found. In the spring of 2000, an unusual team walks up to the foot of Cho Oyu, a joint Russian-Finnish expedition. People from different countries and different mountain schools gathered around a single summit. Some had already stood high. For others, this 8,000er was meant to be a step towards something bigger. The logic was simple. Climb a mountain with a reputation for being reachable and test yourself before tackling harder goals. Among the members is a Finnish student, Noora Toivonen, born in 1974. She is around 25. Young, driven, from a country where you can only see high mountains in photographs. She had come to serious high-altitude climbing along her own path. Beside her in this story stands Pavel Bonadysenko from Irkutsk. He has his own mountain experience behind him, and, more importantly, his own view of how one ought to move in the mountains. Later, that very view would become part of the tragedy. In the same team are people whose names will surface only at the very end, as the names of those who made it and came home. Nasedkin, Kuzmin, Ershova. They would reach the summit a little after the main push, and their success would end up bitterly woven together with what happened to the other two. For now, everything looks like an ordinary expedition. Base camp, tents, crates of gear, talk of the weather, and the schedule of climbs. The mountain above them seems calm and easy to read. No one yet knows that. From the rope team which, in a few weeks, will head up toward the summit, not a single person will come back down. That the joy of the team and the misfortune of two of its own will lie side by side, in the very same hours, on the very same snow. And that in the end, painfully little will be left of these two, footprints in the snow and the account of a chance witness. Success at great altitude rests not on courage, but on dull discipline. The human body was not built for air that holds half the normal amount of oxygen. To survive up high, the body has to be trained gradually, climb a little higher, always come back down, let the blood thicken and adjust, then go up again, and back down again. This up and down ladder is called acclimatization. In high-altitude climbing, it matters more than physical strength. A skipped rung is never forgiven. And here, in the expedition's plan, the first crack appears. Pavel Bonadysenko, trusting his own experience, does not want to stick strictly to the shared schedule and the leader's instructions. He goes his own way. On the early climbs above base camp, he takes on too heavy a load, goes higher, and works harder than the plan calls for. From the outside, it looks like strength and confidence. In truth, it is overspending. The trouble is that between climbs, the body simply doesn't have time to recover. Every extra surge upward without enough rest below does not toughen a person. It drains them. By the days of the decisive push, his acclimatization would turn out to be insufficient. The reserve that would have carried him up and back down had already been eaten into in advance on the approaches. Something similar, it seems, was happening with Toivonen. At such altitude, youth and eagerness sometimes work against a person. Strength feels abundant, and it's easy to overestimate how much of it is left. Endurance melts away slowly and unnoticed, without pain and without clear warning. Small things like this leave no trace at low altitude, but never pass without consequence up high. At 8,000 meters, rest that wasn't taken in time is not just a note in a diary. A shortage of strength surfaces at the worst possible moment, up there where there is nowhere left to retreat, and there may not be enough left for the descent. In the last days before the push, the sky over the mountain gives no respite. The cold holds. A howling wind hammers the ridges, the kind of wind that, at such altitude, blows the warmth out of a person in a matter of minutes. A bad backdrop for the decisive day. Ideally, the team would wait for a steady lull, but in the mountains the weather windows are short and fickle, and the supplies of time, food, and strength for the people up high are not endless, and a window, narrow as it is, opens. The group climbs to the upper camps, getting ready for the final surge. Early in the morning on the 5th of May, 2000, Noora Toivonen and Pavel Bonadysenko leave the third and highest camp and head up toward the summit. They go together, roped up, in the shared rhythm of an expedition push, the way hundreds of groups set out on dozens of mountains. The upper part of Cho Oyu is deceptive. It is not a sharp peak with a single obvious road, but a broad, almost flat snow plateau. In clear weather, you can read the landmarks across it, where the true high point is, where the descent lies, where someone else's slope begins. But let a cloud drop, and the wind rise with the snow, and the plateau turns into a white labyrinth with no walls and no signposts. Up, down, right, and left blur into one milky veil, in which even the direction of your own footprints is lost. Into this upper zone, under the gusts of the storm wind, the two of them climb. Behind them, rest that was never fully taken, and a hidden fatigue that only the mountain knows about. Ahead, that very plateau, where losing your direction is easier than it looks from below. They will not be seen climbing higher again. From here begins a stretch of the story that no one in the team watched directly, and that would later have to be pieced together, bit by bit, from other people's words and from boot prints in the snow. Down below in the camps, the mood is entirely different. The expedition can feel that the goal is close, that the push has succeeded. On days like this, the tents ring with that special weary jubilation known only to people who have walked for months toward a single point on a map. It seems the hardest part is behind them. This is what they came here for, but joy up high always stands next to dread. And this time, behind the shared jubilation hides an unsettling fact. 2 members of the team have not come back. Toivonen and Bonadysenko do not descend by evening. They are not back through the night. At first, it can be explained by anything. They lingered, they're moving slowly, they're waiting out a gust of wind. But hour by hour, the explanations grow more alarming, and here the cruel arithmetic of great altitude shows itself. At 8,000 meters, you cannot simply walk out to meet the weary and lead them home by the hand. The people who have just come down from above have almost nothing left in them. To climb back up, into the zone where there is almost no oxygen at night, in a gale, that most likely means not coming back yourself. The mountain sets the rescuers before a choice in which there is no good answer. Hours pass, then a whole day. The silence does not end. No silhouettes on the plateau, no voice, no movement, only the wind and the whiteness, which give nothing back. The 2 who set out in the morning toward the summit seem to have dissolved between the sky and the snow. So, in the same days, victory and loss come together. The team felt the goal was already in hand, and on that same push came up 2 people short. Months of preparation had led to success, but a misfortune no one had expected lay down beside it. From this moment on, the fate of Noora Toivonen and Pavel Bonadysenko stops being a matter of waiting. It becomes a riddle with no answer, for the team on the mountain and for everyone this story would reach later. The only thread by which anything at all can be reconstructed comes not from their comrades, but from a stranger. A Korean group climbs toward the summit, and with them goes a local guide. On the snow of the upper plateau, his eye catches what would later become the key piece of evidence: 2 lines of footprints left there before him. It is precisely by these that the last path of the vanished rope team can be traced. The footprints tell a short and bitter story. At first, they lead confidently upward, toward a false preliminary summit. On such broad snow plateaus, this is a classic trap. A small mound ahead looks like the high point, and a weary person in foul weather easily mistakes it for the goal. The 2 of them, judging by the prints, reached this spot. Then the footprints betray a moment of doubt. They turn back a little, as if the 2 realized they were not standing on the real summit and tried to reconsider their direction. This was the second in which everything could still have been set right. The correct descent lay off to the side, toward their own camp. But instead, the footprints sharply veer to the left, toward Nepal, away from the right path down. In good visibility, such a mistake is almost impossible. It's too obvious which way to go. In a howling wind and a snowy murk, when the plateau turns into white nothingness, the rope team simply loses the line of the route and heads onto a foreign slope, taking it for the way home. So, on the gentle, easy crown of the mountain, everything is decided. Not a fall, not an avalanche, not a collapse. One mistaken move in the fog. The 2 went left where salvation lay to the right, and every step that followed carried them farther from the single thread that led back to life. The mountain that people call a stroll punished them not for weakness and not for daring, but for a sense of direction lost for a couple of minutes. Beyond that turn to the left, the routing mistake turned into a far more serious trap. The slope facing Nepal is too steep for a safe descent. It is not a gentle plateau you can slowly plod across, but a sheer side of the mountain, where every step down comes easy and every step up costs 3 times as much. The 2, who had already spent their strength on the climb and on wandering in the fog, kept descending it, farther and farther, into a place from which return is almost impossible. The trap snaps shut quietly. As the rope team descends, both are certain that every step brings them closer to the tents. The realization comes too late. It arrives when it becomes clear that this slope does not lead to the camp, that underfoot is already the foreign, Nepalese side of the mountain. By this time, the 2 are already too far and too low below their own ridge. To get back, they would have to climb up again, against the steepness and against the wind. And there is nothing left to climb with. What was spent on those early days had, by now, been finished off by hours of wandering across the plateau, and no reserve remained at all. From here, altitude itself takes over. In such cold and such a gale, with no shelter and no strength, almost no chance of holding on remains. The most likely cause of death for the two was hypothermia on an open slope, where there is no shelter, no way to get warm, and no hope of help. Neither Noora Toivonen nor Pavel Bonadysenko was ever found. No one reached them. They stayed where people can no longer go, beyond maps and reports. Even the exact hour when the last footprints break off could not be established. Only the general outline is known. Two people set out for the summit, turned the wrong way, and did not come back. Everything else stayed under the snow, together with them. The expedition's story did not end there. Strangely enough, after the disappearance of the two, the team did not pack up and leave the mountain. Some of the members continued the climb, and made it. On the 10th and 12th of May, Oleg Nasedkin, Evgeny Kuzmin, and Marina Ershova reached the summit of Cho Oyu. For Marina Ershova, this climb became something special. She went down in history as the first woman from St. Petersburg to ascend an 8,000er. An achievement that, at another time, would have been the main headline was here forever tied to the shadow of loss. One expedition, one mountain, a difference of only a few days, and the record stands next to the disappearance so closely that the two can no longer be pulled apart into separate stories. Of how it all ended for Noora Toivonen and Pavel Bonadysenko, there are almost no firm facts. No one saw their final hours. Neither the time nor the point where their strength finally gave out is known. All that remains is the foul weather of those days, the footprints in the snow that a passing guide happened to notice, and the shape of a slope from which there is no escape. Beyond that, only silence. And in that silence lies the main lesson of a mountain that keeps being sold as the easiest of them all. Cho Oyu brought down on these two neither an avalanche nor an ice collapse. It needed only the white expanse up top, a brief break in the weather, and one fork where a mistake is the simplest thing in the world. That turned out to be enough. While down below they celebrated the success of the push. Up above, two people were walking off into the unknown. They were not found that season, nor later. On the far Nepalese side of the mountain, Noora and Pavel remained just as they were. There, where the team's happy ending and their own disappearance came together on one and the same ascent. And that silence, which began on the morning of the 5th of May, 2000, goes on to this day, as the most honest answer to the question of just how safe a truly high climb can ever be. He took the summit, and the summit never let him come back down. 23 years old, the first Spaniard to complete the Snow Leopard, and his second 8,000er in a single season. Javier Ormazabal reached the highest point of Cho Oyu alone. No rope, no witnesses. And on the way down, he vanished so quietly that no one even learned of his disappearance until several days later. He was found by strangers, in a stranger's tent, at 7,800 meters. Why is solitude at 8,000 meters more dangerous than any fall? The answer is up there, at the top. Autumn of 2004, the slopes of Cho Oyu. Javier Ormazabal is climbing toward the summit alone. Not roped to anyone, not in a team, alone. No one behind him. No one to see his silhouette on the ridge. No one to follow him with their eyes as he moves. He gets there. 8,100 meters fall away beneath his feet. But altitude has its own law. A success won alone is a success no one can share. No one to back you up, to hand you the water bottle, to notice that a man is burning out faster than he can feel it himself. This is not a story about the descent being harder than the climb. It is about something else, about what it means to be at 8,000 meters completely alone. The decision to go without a partner is one you make yourself, and the price of it falls on you alone too. There is no second pair of eyes to catch your first mistake. There is you, the mountain, and the silence. That silence is what will matter most. Somewhere on the descent, Ormazabal will stop moving downward, and there will be no one near to sense that moment. The silence around a man who never came back from the summit will be total, and it will last not for hours, but for days, until other climbers make their own way up to the high camps and understand what no one below could ever read from the passing time. Who was he, this man who met the highest point of his life in solitude? To understand his choice, we have to go back to a small Basque town, Urretxu, a town in the province of Gipuzkoa, deep in the Basque country. Here, on the 26th of March, 1981, Javier Ormazabal Aristegui was born. The Basque lands are wedged between the sea and the mountains, and for the people here, the mountains are not something exotic. They are everyday life. This place produced many climbers. The region gave Spanish and world mountaineering a solid school of hardened people, used to wet rock and steep slopes. Javier comes to the mountains early. He is not the kind who tries it and quits. He climbs a lot, stubbornly, year after year, adding altitude and experience. He develops his own style, a pull toward self-reliance, toward roots where you can count above all on yourself. Where others look for a big team and a dependable support line, he more and more often goes light on his own strength. He had a habit, too, that people back home would remember later. From every summit he reached, Javier brought back a stone, not a souvenir from a shop, a real fragment of the mountain, lifted up there, at the top, with his own hands. He carried the stones home to Urechu and kept them as a chronicle of his mountains, each one with its own altitude, its own wind, its own story. In time, a whole collection grew, a little museum of his climbs. By the age of 23, he already had a serious record behind him. Not a teenager with a dream, but a formed high-altitude climber with big, concrete goals. Those who knew him remember a calm confidence and a quiet discipline. Without them, there is nothing to be done in the great mountains. This character, independent, stubborn, aimed at the highest peaks, is what would lead him first to a rare title, and then to the Himalayas. His first loud achievement would be a project that no Spaniard before him had ever closed: the Snow Leopard. Behind the beautiful name lies a harsh set of 5 peaks above 7,000 meters on the territory of the former Soviet Union. Peak Communism, Khan Tengri, Peak Pobeda, Peak Lenin, Peak Korzenievskaya. The mountains of the Pamir and the Tian Shan, each with a temper of its own. Collecting all 5 is not for a casual person. Violent weather, long routes, altitudes where the body works at its limit. Peak Pobeda is considered one of the most dangerous 7,000ers in the world. The Leopard is not a medal for a single burst of effort. It is recognition of long work in a place that forgives no mistakes. Ormazabal walks this path all the way through and becomes the first Spaniard to take all 5. A young Basque from tiny Urechu writes his name into history, not with a record, but with a methodical, honest ascent of 5 formidable mountains. After that, people speak of him as a man with a future, the kind who knows how to carry long, multi-year projects through to the finish. And the next threshold rises before him. The 7,000ers are mastered, which means higher, toward the 14 greatest peaks on the planet, each one rising past 8,000 meters. It is toward the Himalayan 8,000ers that he turns his gaze, in the autumn of the year when everything would change. He plans the autumn season of 2004 on a grand scale. One summit is not enough. He goes to the Himalayas for 2 8,000ers at once, one after the other. A bold idea. To build high-altitude form on the first mountain, and, without losing it, carry that form straight over to the second. First comes Shishapangma, 8,046 meters, the only 8,000er that lies entirely within Tibet. On the 27th of September, 2004, Ormazabal climbs it. Here he is not alone. Beside him are partners, companions in spirit and in risk. Half the plan is done. The mountain is taken, the body has adjusted to the thin air, and it would be a shame to lose that hard-won reserve of form. The second target is very close, Cho Oyu. It is often called the more accessible one, and climbers take it after a hard ascent, making use of the acclimatization they already have. Ormazabal takes it that way too, as the continuation of a successful season. And that is where the trap is hidden. The second mountain seems easier than the first. It comes as an add-on, and attention naturally begins to dull. The main thing, you tell yourself, is already behind you. But altitude grants no discount for past merit. 8,000 meters remain 8,000 meters, no matter how the season went before. And yet the fatal turn would come precisely on this spare summit. Not on the severe Shishapangma, taken with a team, but on Cho Oyu, because here he would make the decision that changed everything. To go for the summit entirely alone. What does it mean to set out for an 8,000er alone? It is trust in yourself pushed to the limit. Solo at that altitude is not a pose, not bravado, but a heavy bet. Everything is on the line, and there is no safety net at all. The one who goes alone willingly gives up what, up high, can matter more than experience and gear. Another person beside you. On a rope, partners share everything: the weight of the tent and the food, the pace, and above all, the responsibility for decisions. Up top, where oxygen is scarce and thoughts turn thick, the second climber notices what you cannot: that you have been standing still too long, that it is time to turn back. He will pull you out, lift you up, bring you through. The soloist has none of that. Everything rests on one man, and there lies the weakness. As long as it all goes to plan, solo looks beautiful and clean. But let something go wrong. The strength fails, a storm rolls in, a foot slips, and suddenly there is no one near. No voice, no hand, no witness. Ormazabal chooses this consciously. His style is self-reliance, faith in his own strength, the habit of leaning above all on himself. On Cho Oyu, he stays true to himself and goes up without companions. On the 13th of October, 2004, he sets out for the summit alone. Ahead lies the highest point of the season, and, as it turns out, of his whole life. And down below, in base camp, no one moves at his pace. No one sees what is happening on the route. He stands for himself, alone. By the end of the day, the goal is taken. Ormazabal stands on the summit of Cho Oyu, there, where almost the entire planet lies beneath his feet. His second 8,000er of the season, after Shishapangma, just a couple of weeks later. Few can manage such a pace. 2 mountains past 8,000, taken almost back to back, within a single autumn window between the storms. For a 23-year-old high-altitude climber, it is a claim to a great career. Perhaps up there at the top, he allows himself a moment of triumph. Perhaps he lifts another stone, as he had from all the summits before. The season is going brilliantly. 2 8,000ers, both according to plan. From here, the future looks clear. But the summit has a quality that is easy to forget when you are on the ridge. It is not the finish. It is the high point of a large loop. Upward you are drawn by the goal, by the excitement, by the strength you have stored. Then, the turn. And the second half begins, where there is no longer an alluring point ahead, where the excitement is spent and the body is empty. You go down on what is left of you in the same thin air, where fatigue creeps up quietly and the understanding of danger arrives too late. And all of this Ormazabal has to go through alone. No one will carry the weight of the way down with him. No one will call out to him if he slows. And above the mountain, something is already gathering that will turn the descent into a fight for his life. The weather on an 8,000er flips in minutes. Barely has Ormazabal started down when a storm engulfs him. Wind and snow batter the slope. The world shrinks to a few meters of visibility. The storm holds him in the mountains for about 2 days. For a man whose summit is already behind him, and whose strength is almost gone, that is an eternity. In a storm like this, everything is decided. As long as there is visibility, the soloist still has a choice. Once it is gone, the entire price of the decision falls on the one who went alone. In a storm at altitude, there is nowhere to wait for help. No one will come out to meet you. Down below, no one even knows on which stretch of the slope he is now stuck, or in what condition. Every meter down is heavier than the last. The storm breaks his rhythm, draws out his warmth, eats away his strength. Ormazabal fights his way toward the tents of the last high camp, toward the only shelter where a man can wait it out. To reach it in such a state, alone, through a 2-day storm, is almost impossible. And yet, he gets there. At an altitude of about 7,800 meters, where the last high camp is usually pitched on the classic route, Ormazabal reaches a tent. Drained, worn down by the storm and the altitude, he crawls inside. The tent is not his. It belongs to another expedition that happened to be there. In that thin nylon shelter, his path comes to an end. From the circumstances, it seems everything happened quietly. A man worn out to his very limit reached shelter, and there he stopped. At such an altitude, in total exhaustion, the body can no longer cope with the strain, and the reserve of strength needed to move on is simply not left to him. Here it is, the quiet simplicity of what happened. No fall, no plunge, no struggle over an abyss. Just a man who reached shelter at the very edge of his strength, and an altitude that left him no reserve for the way back. Under thin nylon, in the middle of a deserted snowy slope, where at that mark even stopping is dangerous. And then comes the most bitter part, the silence. Javier had climbed alone, and not a single person tracked his descent in real time. On the other side of the airwaves, there was no one to notice. The radio had gone quiet long ago. The point on the route had frozen in place. Only several days later, down below, would people piece together the simple, bitter picture. The summit of Cho Oyu was behind him, but to the settled camps lower down, where warmth and people were waiting, he never came back. He is found in a tent at an altitude of about 7,800 meters. By some accounts, by a fellow member of his expedition, by others, by Italian climbers who had come up to the same camp. One way or another, he is found by strangers who happen to be near too late. Here is the true price of solitude at altitude. The one who goes alone pays not only for the climb up and the climb down, he also pays with that delay, which the altitude never forgives. When everything is decided in minutes, there has to be at least someone near who catches the change before it is too late. Javier did not have those minutes, only a stranger's tent and a slope, where, for far too long, no one came to look for him. Javier Ormazabal was only 23. He did not die on the harsh first mountain of the season, but on the one he considered the easier one, taken almost as an afterthought. In Urechu, they did not forget him. In 2017, his brother Andoni founded a scholarship in his name, one that supports young climbers with bold projects, and the stones he brought back from every summit became part of an exhibition in his memory, a silent chronicle of a life lived at altitude. His story remained a quiet warning. A mountain called one of the most accessible took a strong, experienced man without a single dramatic gesture, simply because he was there alone. And in the silence that fell at 7,800 meters, what rings out loudest of all is the price of the decision to go alone. What is a Canadian police officer from flat, wind-battered Winnipeg doing on the sixth highest 8,000er on the planet? He is climbing upward for the sake of other people's children. He is raising money to send Nepalese orphans to college. Not a legend, not a record breaker, just a man with a job and a family. In early October of 2008, on the descent from Cho Oyu, a storm closes in over him. And what cuts everything short is not the thing everyone who sets out for an 8,000er fears. Not the roar of a wall of snow coming down, not the abyss beneath his feet, not the shortage of thin mountain air. Just one wrong step on a slope the whole world calls safe. How did it happen that the brightest of goals led to such a quiet and bitter end? This story has no hero in the usual sense. There is no famous name known among the great mountains, no list of records, no magazine covers. There is a man named Guy Levey, a Canadian from Winnipeg, a city on the flat plains of the province of Manitoba, where the nearest serious summit is thousands of kilometers away. He wore a uniform for almost his entire adult life, a police constable with nearly 20 years of service, patrol, the youth division, traffic duty, that quiet, everyday work out of which a real police officer is made. For the last 10 years or so, he practiced a special craft. Guy was a forensic examiner, an identification expert. He would arrive at a place where something had happened and, from the smallest of details, piece together the whole picture. A fingerprint, a scratch, a thing dropped by accident. To him, these were a language in which circumstances speak without words. His work was to rebuild other people's stories from the fragments left behind, once those people could no longer tell their own. His colleagues spoke of him briefly and with respect, the best at what he did. A mentor people came to for advice, and for that calm certainty he had never lacked. Young forensic experts learned from him to look more closely and not rush to conclusions. When his shift ended, another life began. Home, its cares, the city on the plain, and one passion that carried him far beyond the flat horizon of Manitoba. Guy loved the mountains, not as a tourist snapping a couple of photos from a lookout point, but for real, with a backpack, a rope, and long hours of training. And it is almost funny when you think about it. A man raised in a place where you can't see anything taller than a phone tower spent his whole life reaching for real rock faces. And that is the whole tension of what came next. An ordinary man with an ordinary life, and the highest summits on the planet. A mountain, after all, doesn't ask whether you're a legend or not. And here is what matters to understand about him before anything else. Climbing was never a way for him to prove something to anyone. Guy didn't collect summits like trophies, didn't chase a list he could hang on the wall. He went to the mountains for the sake of other people. That, perhaps, is the warmest thing in this whole story. The first big instance came in 2006. Guy traveled to Nepal, to the beautiful and treacherous Ormazabal. From the outside, the adventure of an experienced amateur, nothing more. But the goal had nothing to do with adventure. He went to raise money through the Children's Wish Foundation, and he was raising it for one particular family, the family of his colleague, Constable Chris Wingfield, whose little daughter was gravely ill. The girl was fighting leukemia. Guy wanted this family to have a chance to get away, to catch their breath, to be together somewhere they longed to be. Just think about that. A grown man with plenty of worries of his own takes time off, spends money, strength, and months of training, and climbs a 7,000er, not for the adrenaline, but to help a child who isn't even his own. He turns his own risk into someone else's hope. For him, the mountain is not a stage for a feat, but a tool, a way to do good the only way he knows how. That is how he always went to the mountains. Every big climb took on meaning beyond the route itself. For some, a summit is about themselves, about their limit, about a personal, I made it. For Guy Levey, it was about someone else. And when, 2 years later, he began preparing for the most serious challenge of his life, he was again not looking for glory. He was looking for a reason to help. In the autumn of 2008, a new plan takes shape in him. Bigger than anything before, Guy chooses Cho Oyu, the 6th highest summit on the planet. A true 8,000er, a different league, a different air, a different measure of risk. For a man who puts on a uniform every morning and comes home to his household chores every evening, this is an enormous, carefully weighed decision, one you prepare for over months, not weeks. And once again, the climb is undertaken not for his own sake. This time, Guy is going to raise money for the education of Nepalese orphans, children who have no parents, no money, no chance at school. He wants to send them to college. Picture the whole scope of the idea. A Canadian police officer climbing one of the highest summits in the world so that other people's children on the far side of the planet can sit down at a school desk. What he wants is not a line in a record table, but classrooms full of kids he has never met. Kids he most likely will never meet at all. He is not alone on the team. Beside him is another Canadian, and the whole group is led by an experienced organizer, Stu Remensnyder. The people gathered are dependable. The route is laid out. The gear is checked. It all looks solid. The mountain was not chosen at random. Cho Oyu has long carried a reputation as the most accessible of the 8,000ers, the summit people start with, to test themselves against great altitudes. That reputation draws people here who would never dream of setting foot on, say, K2. And that same reputation is a treacherous trap. Behind the word accessible hides the same altitude, the same thin air, and the same ability of the mountain to punish the slightest carelessness. But for now, no one is thinking about that. For now, there is only a noble goal, an assembled team, and a ticket to the Himalayas. On the slopes, everything goes according to plan. The expedition sets out on the route at the turn of September into October, the autumn window considered favorable for this mountain. By day the sun shines, the snow creaks under their crampons, the meters of altitude fall away one after another. They work by the old scheme, honed over decades, base camp below, then a chain of intermediate camps rising higher, with acclimatization pushes and descents back down, so the body can grow used to the lack of oxygen. Guy carries himself with confidence. Behind him lie Ormazabal, years of training, and the calm temperament of a man used to acting by the book and not panicking. He doesn't rush ahead, doesn't play the hero, moves at the group's shared rhythm. Everything as it should be, everything by the manual. But the autumn season here has a hidden catch. The weather flips in a matter of hours. The morning is serene, and by noon the sky closes in, and the wind is already driving stinging ice crystals into your face. For now, though, the mountain seems to play along. It lets people climb higher, shows them the views, gives them the feeling that everything is under control and that the summit really is as easygoing as the stories say. And this is exactly where the most dangerous trap of high altitude hides. Not the sheer walls, not the bottomless drops, but the calm that lulls you to sleep. When a slope seems like an easy walk for so long, the guard inside you quietly dozes off. A person moves a little faster, breathes a little freer, trusts the mountain a little more than he should. Every day lived without incident adds confidence and takes away caution. The team climbs higher and higher toward the very top, with very little left to go. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the thing that will cross out every calculation is already gathering. And it comes. The clear sky that had held the mountain in peace for several days fills with lead. A storm begins. At altitude, this is not rain and wind. It is a dense wall of snow, an icy whirl in which everything around you drowns. A world that was clear and familiar that very morning turns, within minutes, into a white nothing. The wind strikes so hard you have to lean into it with your whole body just to stay upright. Grains of snow slash the face, get under the mask, cake the goggles. Visibility falls almost to zero. You can no longer make out your own outstretched hand. The terrain, which a couple of hours ago seemed simple, now works against you. Every ledge, every ice-crusted stone, every familiar slope becomes dangerous simply because you can no longer see it. There is only one choice here: down. You cannot stay up top in the full fury of the storm, and the team begins the descent. And a descent in a storm is just about the most treacherous thing there is in the mountains. The muscles are already wrung out from the climb. The head is muddled from the thin air, movements are slowed. And against all that lies the way down, where you cannot relax for a single second, even though your body is begging for nothing else. Every step now is under full control. Feel for a hold, test each point where you set your foot. Watch the rope, watch your companions, watch your own breathing, and all of it in a white haze where every landmark has been erased. Strength drains away, the cold works into the bones, and the mountain no longer plays along. It has shown its second face. And on this deceptively simple slope, which the team walked up without a single hitch, the price of the smallest slip suddenly becomes beyond repair. This happens at the very start of October 2008. The exact date differs slightly between sources. Some give the 3rd, some the 4th. And that uncertainty itself tells you how much chaos surrounded it all. Somewhere out there, on the descent, in the whirling snow, Guy Levey falls. It is worth pausing on, exactly what ended his path. Not an avalanche that sweeps away whole rope teams, not a crevasse hidden under a crust of snow, not the failure of a body worn out by the altitude. What takes him is the most ordinary thing there is in the mountains: a fall. One wrong movement on a slick, ice-crusted slope, in a storm when there is almost no visibility. A trifle at first glance, but at this altitude, in this weather, it does not forgive. That is the whole bitter paradox. An ordinary man, with the brightest goal anyone could ever imagine, dies on a summit that carries a reputation for being gentle and forgiving. He came not to conquer and not to prove himself. He came to help other people's children, and on this simple terrain, everything ends. His companions can change nothing. In such a storm, in such visibility, at such altitude, help is all but impossible. Each person is holding on at his own limit, and any extra movement in these conditions is deadly risky. The mountain does not care with what intention you came to it, and this, perhaps, is what has to be remembered. Behind this story on the slope of Cho Oyu, there is no abstract conqueror of summits. There is a police officer from Winnipeg, a mentor to younger colleagues, a dependable friend, and a volunteer who, on his last day, was doing good. The news travels a long way, from a snow-covered slope in the Himalayas to flat, wind-battered Winnipeg, thousands of kilometers away. In the city where Guy patrolled the streets, taught the young, and built his everyday life, the word lands hard. A man who could calmly unravel the most difficult cases is now being seen off himself. On the 24th of October, 2008, in Winnipeg, at Emmanuel Pentecostal Church, a memorial service is held. Colleagues come, and so do those who knew him from work and from life. There is a great deal of uniform, people who go out every day to the same work he gave 20 years to. Aloud they recall what the whole department already knew: his quiet dependability, his habit of never acting rashly, his readiness to lend a shoulder to a newcomer. Only now, all of it is spoken in the past tense. But what remains is the very thing he went to the mountains for. The cause to which he gave his last climb, helping children who have nothing, does not go out with him. His impulse, his willingness to trade his own risk for someone else's chance, outlives him. That is the real Mark Guy Levey left behind. And here the story settles into a quiet, almost aching symmetry. A man whose work was to read other people's traces, to reconstruct the fates of others from the smallest of details, left behind a trace of his own that can be read easily, with no expertise at all, a trace of good intention, and the mountain stands as it has always stood. Time and again, it takes those who came to it counting on its gentleness. Professionals and amateurs, the ambitious and the quiet volunteers. Guy is one of many in that long line of people who believed in its seeming simplicity. And perhaps the most honest thing that can be said in the end is this. Behind every such story, there was a living person who simply wanted to climb up and come home.